I think the testimony Kev gave earlier was very powerful, Lord. And Father, I know it got me going again. Father, there's a time and a place for testimony, and this is the time and place for the preaching of the Word. And Father, Lord, your Word is how we grow. And I don't totally understand it, Lord. I like novels, I like the books I've written, all kind of things. But Father, they're nothing like your Word. The best secular book I've ever read is nothing like your Bible, Lord. You can only read a secular book so many times, Lord. No matter how much you like it. Your word's eternal. And it really is, Father. I can hear the story of David and Goliath over and over and over. And yet there's something new for me, whether I'm 5 or I'm 85, Lord. There's something new. So I pray right now you bless your word in Jesus' name. Amen. We're getting to the end of the story. I attended a funeral this week, and it got me thinking about what the sermon matter is. What's our end going to be? You go to a funeral, and sometimes you're surprised by how many people are there, in a good and sometimes a bad way. The funeral I was at this week, there's a good amount of people there, a good amount of people at calling hours. I've been to ceremonies even for people that I'm related to. One time there was I think maybe 10 people there, and the person's sister didn't even come, and they lived in town. Do you know what I mean? It just, there's differences, and and there was no calling hours because there was no need for calling hours. I'm not laughing, I'm just being serious. The family that came were the only ones coming for the funeral. Do you see what I'm saying? There was nobody to greet or whatever. So the reason I share that with you, is this. I want to talk about that because in the story of Esther, there's a bad ending and there's a good ending. And I don't know about you, but sometimes at funerals, I think about if Jesus tarries, and he might not. Amen. He might not tarry. I may never be at a funeral for myself. That'd be weird. It's so good. I love it.
We preach your sermon by the recording.
Anyway, but the raptures, if the rapture happens, there'll be no need for a funeral. That will already have been dispensed with. All right? That's what I'm trying to say. But if there is, you don't know how long you're going to tarry in this earth, where you're going to be, what the conditions are socially, whether you're even going to have any friends in the area, you're going to die alone or whatever. But you think about what will people say, what will the impact of my life be, what will people remember about me? But I want to tell you something. We think a lot of things, but other people are sometimes a good reflection of reality, not always. I'll give you one example. Yesterday, I finished this up. It wasn't detailed yet. I hadn't even thought about detailing it. And Titus and Ella were helping their mom, and they were being good help. They were not being annoying help. They were being good help. And they wandered into the room, and I said, Titus looked at the thing. There was no roof. And he goes, "What's that?" I said, "Well, it's Fred Flintstone's house." I was so proud of myself. He just kind of looks at it. So a little defensively, maybe, I hope I was still kind. I think I was still being kind. I said, it's probably a show you've never seen. He goes, "Actually, I've watched 10 episodes." So he's still looking at it very... He wasn't being bad. He wasn't being annoying. He just wasn't buying what I was selling. So I walked downstairs and said, "Gil, when you get done with the back trip, can you come detail this?" And it looks a lot better, amen? It looks a lot more like a house. Maybe not like Fred Flintstone's house, but it looks like some sort of house. So anyway...
This house is a cave.
So at funerals sometimes, it's interesting what people remember about the deceased. Even how they talk about the deceased. And sometimes family members don't even want to be there, and sometimes everybody wants to be there. It's just all different. You never know what you're going to walk into. You just never know. What kind of ending are you going to have? Is it going to be a good ending or a bad ending? You see, I was at a funeral this week. There's probably other funerals for other people all the time. The question is, it doesn't really matter what happens to other people. What kind of ending are you going to have? What's the ending of your story? What's that going to be like? So let's look at the word. Esther 7:7. I'm in Isaiah. I don't want to be in Isaiah. Oh, right. I printed this stuff out in really big print. Okay. So, and there's a mistake in the notes. It says 8, and that's not Lorena's fault. It says 8 in the notes. It's actually 7. So the first few verses, you see that? 8, make that chapter 7, 7, 7, 7, 7. I just caught that later in the week. It was too late to do anything about it. All right, it says in Esther 7, 7 through 10, "And the king, rising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went into the palace garden, And Haman stood up to make a request for his life. Now, I can't re-preach the last message I preached on Esther. But Haman was having a really, 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 really bad day. Only he didn't know how bad it was going to get. It was bad enough when he walked into the banquet. It got really bad in a hurry when the queen turned around. The king's so in love with his wife. And his wife said, well, if you want to do something for me, would you mind not having me killed? And the people of my race too, and while you're at it. Nobody, and then the king's like, who would do such a thing? The queen says, well, it's this guy right here. Man, that's not what you want to hear. King's so mad he walks out. I don't know what's going on in his head. Could be a lot of things. I mean, Haman was his best friend. I don't know what's going on in his head. But I will tell you what might be going on in his head. You see, and because he brings this up later. That decree he made for Haman, that couldn't be undone. He says that later. He says, I can't undo the decree I did. And maybe, have you ever made a decision and later realized it was irrevocable? It was done? Do you understand? Just because he's the king doesn't mean he gets to do whatever he wants to do all the time. And so I wonder if he's now thinking out in the garden how to save his wife. I don't know what he's thinking about, but that's got to be on his mind. So Haman says, so the king leaves in great anger. Boy, that's not what you want as the guy whose anger is going to be soon directed at. You understand the king back then could just take your head off if he was having a bad day. Drag that guy out, take his head off. You might not have done anything wrong, but you might have just torqued him off. You were real careful what you said in front of the king. We don't have a culture like that today. I was watching a movie, I don't remember what movie, yeah, maybe it was based on a novel or something. Anyway, it was about Japanese culture back in the Shogun and all that. Can you imagine being in a culture where you just committed suicide if you offended someone and that was considered what you were supposed to do? You know what I mean? You offended, so end of you. And I just think about the scene, let's show the scene. The guy was new to the culture and he hung a wild animal he had killed. He was just letting it, some of you hunters do this, he's just letting it kind of, before he took it down and did something. Well, he forgot about it. He got busy, forgot about it. Well, it's a dead animal. Just sitting there. It's going to stink after a while. And finally the servants have tea together. And they're like, in other words, if you took that down, you were disobeying your boss. Now, in American culture, you might be like, in that culture, and they each talked about who would be the one that would die for doing it. And finally, one old guy said, you know what, the gardener, I've lived a good life. I'll do it. So he takes it down, disposes of it, and then he kills himself. What a different culture! That's the kind of thing with the king. You could die for just looking at him wrong. Boom, that's it. There's no lawyer, there's no whatever, you're dead. So Haman is scared out of his mind. And so he is begging for his life. The really bad day got a lot worse. Verse 8, when the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, Haman was fallen upon the bed whereon Esther was. He's desperate. Then said the king, I don't know how sharp the king is, okay? But this is what it looks like to him. He says, will he force the queen also before me in the house? In your sermon notes, you have the word there with one word missing. Gail said maybe a better word would be accost. But basically, it was R-A-P-E. That's what he was thinking was going on there. And he was hit. That's what he means. That's what he thinks is happening. Trust me, that's not what Haman meant. You know what's interesting? Talk about a bad end. Even when you're trying to beg for your life, you're totally misinterpreted. Because Haman wasn't trying to do that. Haman was just trying to stay alive. That's all he was trying to do. And so the king says, is he going to do that? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. By the way, that's done. There's no arguing with that. The king interpreted that's what was going on. So that's how it was. Aren't you glad you live in a system where you're innocent until proven guilty?
Yes.
Amen. Because, can you imagine? So somebody decides, because sometimes you live guilty about things, right? You happen to be in the wrong place, the wrong time, maybe you have a similar car, maybe whatever. And if a little investigation is done and finds out, well, that, maybe you're guilty of something else, but you were doing that. You know, you didn't do that. Yes, I was robbing the store, but I didn't kill anybody, and I don't know how that happened, you know. Here's the deal. So the king, and that's it. The servants immediately, that this guy's done. It's as if he's guilty. He's done. He's done. You live in a system where you get a court trial. This world, no, you're done. There is no court trial. King says that, and you're done. You don't live in the world these people live in. It's crazy. It's a very different world, right? By the way, the Bible says Jesus is our king. Does that bring things a little bit better perspective sometimes? We try to take our world today into that world. It doesn't. Anyway, as we're went, they covered Haman's face. Okay, so back to the notes. Haman knows he's doomed, begs the queen for mercy. King interprets that as he's trying to do bad things to her and cost her. Good thing you're keeping up here, because I'm not. And the helpful. So the king's like, when the king's mad, people are always trying to get brownie points. Does that ever happen to the boss? People trying to get brownie points. Do you know what I mean? Ooh. 24 hours earlier, Haman was on top of the world. And now everyone can't wait to do him in to get score a few brownie points with the king. And so, helpful servant says, well, also the gallows, behold, also the gallows 50 feet high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who's smoking good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. Did you catch that? This servant's really pressing for broke. He's like, man, tell you what. There's this huge gallows. Well, actually, we think it's a big stake that they impaled him on. We think that the newer translations are actually right about that. King James assumed it meant hang. Because of the culture, we think that actually meant they impaled them. But whatever. I got 50 feet in the house. And you know what he's going to do with that? Why? Mordecai's such a good guy. He was going to use that for Mordecai. That never came up before that. Did you catch that? Nobody brought that up before that. It was Mordecai the Jew that sits in the king's gate. That's all that was. But now that the king, well, you know, that Mordecai guy, he's a nice guy. You obviously like him, King, so it's got to be awesome. Well, anyway, bottom line is, helpful servant here just helping out. So they hanged Haman on the gallows, which means that King James right to put him in noose. If modern translations are right, they impaled that boy and put him up there for everybody to see. That's probably what happened. Mordecai, and the king's wrath was pacified. That's a bad end. That's just not how Haman saw that day going. That's a bad end. You and I don't know when we're going to die, and we don't understand the circumstances of that. Things can come crashing down our lives like that. Do you think the people in the Great Depression realized that was coming? They had no idea that was coming. No idea that was coming. No idea that was coming. So, fallout. It wasn't just that Haman died. Sometimes when we come to a bad end, we drag others with us. We drag others down with us when we come to a bad end. Let's look at some things that happens to Haman here. In Esther 9, 1, 2, and 10, again, I've just got it in front of me. You can turn if you like, or just listen. It says, now in the 12th month, that is in the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, when the king's commandment is decreed, drew near to put the execution day of the enemies of the Jews, power over them. Okay, verse 2. Oops. Oh, yeah, I'm right. The enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them. It says, King's commandment decree, verse 2, Jews gather themselves together, the cities around. Well, anyway, I must have had a different verse, and I didn't. That's a good verse. There's a verse that says he gave Haman's house to Queen Esther, and I thought it was that. I should have read that carefully. But anyway, bottom line is his house got given away. Let's keep going, though. So, king's enemies. Oh, I know what I did wrong. Yeah, we're in chapter 8. There we go. So, anyway, I was like, man, I have discombobulated all of these verses. Sometimes at prep time, I just remember the passage, so I don't always really read it. So here we go. 8:1. Here we are. In the day that the king of Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews, unto Esther the queen. So Haman's house got given away to Esther and Mordecai. Do you like your house? Let me tell you something. Some of you hope to give that to your children. Some of you have inherited it from other people. The Fooses in area, I think that was a third or second generation house. And Mr. Foos was always working on that house. I'll never forget. It was beautiful. Because I was a little kid. I remember how it looked when I first got there. It was okay. Give you one example. It could be a million things. He took all the bricks out of the chimney. And he slowly put those stones, round stones, he slowly built that chimney back to be something a lot different. Nice. It was okay before. It wasn't bad. But he made it nicer. And someday maybe one of his children, Sarah or Kenny, will live in their house. And they'll have it for their children. Do you see what I mean? You want maybe your kids to have your house or something. Or someone that you know and love have your house. Haman's house got given to Mordecai. The guy he hated. Okay, the guy he hated got his house. Verse 2. The king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it unto Mordecai. Jared brought up in the Bible, that ring is authority. Jared's not wrong. He's right. All that authority Haman wanted, his worst enemy Mordecai got. There are people that gnash their teeth when their enemies get their way. We see it all the time in the news media. They cry about it, they whine about it. Can you imagine you die and your worst enemy gets all the authority you wanted? In fact, I'm not even sure if Haman actually had that level of authority. King would lend him his ring. I wonder if Mordecai just had the ring. I don't know. Bottom line is he had at least the same authority, maybe more. And then it says, this is now 9:10. All Haman's boys died in one day. In 9:10, it says the sons of Haman, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of whatever, the enemy of the Jews, slew they. All 10 of his boys died. He lost his house. His worst enemy got all the authority he wanted. The guy he hated so much. And all of his boys died. I want you to think about that. 10 kids. Remember how upset Job was when his 10 boys died? Well, actually, he had sons and daughters. 10 children died. Haman's 10 boys died. By his enemies that he wanted to wipe out. I don't know about you. That's a really bad end. You died. Your house is taken away from you and given to your enemies. Your authority is taken away from you and given to your enemies. And all your children, or at least all your boys, are dead. All 10 of them. That's not what you want for your kids.
You want them to be happy.
That's right. Sean is right. You do. So, that's a bad end. How's it going to end when you die? What impact will it have in your children? I think sometimes about a child comes up to mom and dad and says, I want to go to the Lord's house. And they're told, sometimes folks, there are commitments. I'm not saying they're not parent, but this parent's like, you'll never enter that blank house as long as I'm alive. And that parent dies if God's not very gracious. He might be taking more with him than himself. I don't blank ever want that blank God ever mentioned in my blank house ever. There are people that are very adamant about the Lord. They hate Him. And they contaminate everybody around them. My dad didn't have any time for that. My pappy told me or whatever. You know what? Sometimes when people have a bad end, they drag other people with them. Unfortunately, they drag other people with them. Unfortunately. And I'll tell you what, even if your boys live until they're 90 and they go to hell, what does it matter? What does it matter, man? What does it matter? They had a good life. I don't feel so in hell. All right, check this out. The good ending. All right. So, we already read about the ring, right? Mordecai gets authority, right? Mordecai gets massive authority. 2, Mordecai comes up with a way to save the Jews. So remember I told you King Ahasuerus was all kind of upset in 8, 9 through 11. It says, then were the king's scribes called at that time of the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, the 3rd and 20th day. And it was written according to all Mordecai commanded of the Jews, and the lieutenants and the deputies and rulers of the provinces, from India to Ethiopia, and 127 provinces, and every province according to the writing thereof, which was every people, every language, and to the Jew according to the writing and according to their language. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by post and horseback, and riders on mules, camels, and young dromedaries. That sounds really cool, but what are you going to write? It's really groovy. But you can't contradict what the king wrote before. So you got to be really smart. Do you know Jews really value that in their legends and stories? They have been so many times below the thumb of other people. A lot of their stories are about someone shrewd that is able to win favor with the king or something like that and save the lives of everybody there. I'm not just talking about Esther. There are other stories that Jews tell which that's their favorite kind of character. He's powerless, but for his wits. He has no ability to fight back. He just has his wits. And he saves the day by just his wits. Well, in this case, the Lord raised up Mordecai for real. What's he write? Verse 11. Wherein the king granted, that's through Mordecai, the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together and stand for their life to destroy and slay and cause to perish all power of people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, to take the spoil for a prey. Do you see what it was? So the first one was out. Okay, you can wipe out the Jews on this day. Now, whatever you were going to write, that had to stand. You couldn't stop that from happening. So what Mordecai wrote instead is cool. All the enemies of the Jews are allowed to attack them, except that the Jews are allowed to fight back. That makes a difference. That makes a difference. Why do you think the Redcoats were coming for Lexington and Concord to get our guns? Because we were going to fight back. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. You know what I mean? We're going to fight back. They didn't want us to fight back. How are we going to not fight back? You got to take the guns away. So that's what they were going to do. That's what the Redcoats did. The kids learn this all the time in school. Which they should, obviously. And I'm sure they do. All right. So Mordecai found a way to save the Jews. But how did he get that opportunity? Wifey. And this is a part I had missed for years. The wifey. This is Esther 7. It says, verse 2. I'm sorry, 8. It's like, that's the wine banquet. What am I talking about? All right. Verse 3. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device he had devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter. Well, that's a lot different than last time. Did you see the order there? Last time she was scared to death. She came in, he extends the scepter, she touches it. Now she knows King O loves her. So guess what she does? She assumes the scepter is going to be extended. She comes in and immediately starts to beg for his audience. And he extends the scepter, but she already knew he was going to do that. Isn't that beautiful? The wife, you already know she has the heart. She isn't worried about dying now. She knows where she stands with her husband. She just comes in, and he still extends the scepter because it has to be extended. Do you understand that? The guards have to know whether you killed or not. She comes in and starts crying and stuff. He's not like, get this woman out of here. He's like, here you go, wife. Touch the scepter. All right, let's talk. So she just comes in, falls down at his feet, crying with tears. Verse 4, King held out the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther arose, stood before the king, and said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and if things seem right before the king. She's still very respectful. Did you notice that? Mm-hmm. Well, people are being taught to be rude to men and women. There's something to being respectful. It used to be more prized, I think. And if things seem right before the king, and if I be pleasing in his eyes, there's a wifey thing. King, if it's good, if it seems right to you, and if you really like me. That's a good tactic if you're a wife and you know your husband loves you. It's a great tactic if you know your husband loves you. She's like, pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, son of Hamath, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews, which are in the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Listen to verse 7. Then the king of Ahasuerus said to Esther, the queen, and to Mordecai, the Jew, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they hanged upon the gallows, because his hand upon the Jews. Write ye also to the Jews, as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it. For the writing which is written in the king's name is sealed. May no man reverse. The king has no idea what to do. The king has no idea what to do. He goes, all right. Wife, do you understand that? The king hadn't figured this out yet. Hadn't figured out what to do. This wasn't a done deal yet. The Jews were still going to be wiped out. So wifey comes in, says, hubby, need to get on the stick here, bud. Tell you what, sometimes we accuse our wives of nagging us. There is a fine line between nagging and motivating. Women, that's between you and Jesus. The Bible does say a woman that nags is like a dripping faucet, but I'll tell you what, if women didn't motivate us, sometimes, guys, let's be honest, some things wouldn't get done.
Amen.
Amen. Some things wouldn't get done. So sometimes a good wife has to motivate us to do good, right? Sometimes they need to ask Jesus and realize they don't need to remind us so many times. It's something that the wife and the Lord need to come to an agreement on. But wifey comes in and says, Hubbo, we got this big problem here and you haven't done squat about this. You need to get on a stick, babe. You need to get going. You need to get crack-a-lacking on this. It's kind of a big deal. I mean, my people are still slated to die, hon. Good thing you took out Haman. A+. Got more to do.
Big A+.
Yeah, big A+. And the king doesn't know what to do. So he says, Esther, you and Mordecai figure this out. Whatever Mordecai says, I'm doing. That's what Mordecai was going to say. Literally gives him his ring, says whatever you want. That's a blank check, guys. That's a blank check. Do you know how much you have to trust someone to hand them a blank check? Here you go. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be right back with that. And Mordecai does good, not evil, right? And he figures out the problem. He's wise. So listen, wifey gets this movement. I just want to stress today, the role of the housewife is so minimized and so looked down on and so despised. And God used a wife to save an entire nation. And I think he uses wives many times to build a nation. Women, who do you think mentors children? I'm not saying it's a sin for a woman to work. I'm just saying that's your primary job. The working is something on the side. If you can figure that out, the Lord's good, great. But the Lord's going to hold you accountable for your kids. Because you are their mentor. And I'll tell you what, if you have a strong nation, I'd look at the moms. My brother Ellis once pointed out to me, I think it's a good point. He said, Adrian, he said, you know what I've noticed? I've been studying 1st, 2nd Kings and stuff. He goes, you know what I've noticed? How often it mentions the mom. Good or evil king, it mentions mom. Who their mom was. That's it. Just mentions mom. Good or evil king, mentions mom. Interesting. Others, your job is extremely important. I don't think it should be minimized. And I think the value of it is vastly misunderstood. All right. So let's wrap this up. So, and then in 9... So now, I'll just tell you, we don't have time to read all this, but the Bible says Mordecai's favor is sought. People realize Mordecai's where it's at. That's why so many people help the Jews out. Mordecai's now the guy in power. We're going to help out Jewish people. If Haman was the guy in power, guess what? They've been just as happy to wipe out the Jews. Some people just don't care. Politics is a dirty business, you know that? Today we want something, but tomorrow, if the crowd feels differently, well, that's what I was thinking in the first place. And politicians are so smooth sometimes. I've always thought that. They say, like, except for last week. Yeah, you've always thought that. Except for last week when you said the whole opposite thing. Oh, no, I've always thought that was okay. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead. Mordecai used his possession to help God's people. Man, do you see the difference between a good end and a bad end? I am going to read this to you and then wrap up quick. Listen to this. It says, 10, the king of Ahasuerus had a tribute upon the land, upon the isles and the seas, and the acts of his power and his might and declaration of his greatness of Mordecai, wherein the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto the king of Ahasuerus. Now it's just like Haman. And great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people and speaking peace to all his seed. I think sometimes Christian politicians make a mistake.